This is the issue with LA, and this is not a hot take at all. And the hot take that is not a hot take is that everyone there has dead eyes that they're hiding trauma from that they don't talk about. In New York, the second you walk into any room, everyone immediately is like, I'm cold, I'm not happy, I'm angry, I hate this, I hate you, you are making me feel bad. In LA, no one vocalizes anything wrong. So everyone just has blank stares where you know they're thinking stuff. You know that they have things that they don't like, that they want to talk about, but they're in a universe of people who are just people pleasers because they are auditioning during every single interaction they have, whether it's ordering a coffee or whether it's talking to a Netflix executive. They're all worried about showing that they're potentially unhappy. So it just leads to this like dead, fake thing that is Los Angeles.
So I mean, you're correct, but I like that about them. I don't need to know. Like, keep it to yourself. I don't need to know anything about you.
Shanie, where are you from
Too
again?
much openness. I'm from here. I'm from Long Island, and everybody's sharing too much over there. Oversharing.
I disagree.
I don't need to know.
You know what the issue is that then you got to go, it's not the Midwest is the answer because they also don't talk about anything. It's like Boston, I think, is the right amount of gripe. Boston and Philadelphia. If you're not from New York,
that's more gripe than New York. That's extra gripe.
What are you talking about, extra gripe? The issue, you know what the issue was with Seinfeld? I didn't like Seinfeld, the show, because I'd be watching Seinfeld and I'd be like, you call this Jewish gripe? My mom, Jewish gripes 10 times harder than Seinfeld ever did on any of his episodes. So I just watch it. I'd be like, this is the Jews? No, my mom fights about nothing even more than this is a fight about nothing.
My favorite thing you ever did was screenshot text with your mom about how you get news updates from your mother. It's the best thing you've ever done.
Oh, she's got some thoughts about the Ayatollah. Boy, does this woman hate the Strait of Hormuz. I'll tell you right now, there is no one that hates the Strait of Hormuz more than Irene Levine. She despises the Strait of Hormuz. The worst case scenario is that she gets a B-12 bomber license and is like, I'm going to open the strait myself, which we're this close to. If the Abraham Accords fall apart, I'm telling you right now, my mom is showing up to the Strait of Hormuz with a Lockheed Martin-sponsored jet, just opening the thing up herself. And with that, it is another episode of the New York Times 120 Angry Seats Hour run-up to the Israeli election. And we're doing this in partnership with the Israel Policy Forum. Partnership, whatever you want to call it. Featuring Israel Policy Forum.
Featuring Shanie Reichman, who works at Israel Policy Forum.
That's the correct legal way to say it that I definitely did not get correct. On today's episode, last episode, if you haven't listened to, go and listen to. It is the primer for this episode. Last episode, we gave a very nice basic rundown of how Knesset works up until the stuff we're going to talk about today, which is how the different political parties in Knesset are kind of formed and made. So that's what we're going to be talking about on today's episode. Before we go into today's episode, though, we, of course, have a little bit of news coming in just on how political polling has been going. Last episode, we recorded and posted right before there was new polling that came out that showed that Gadi Eisenkott's lead over Bibi Netanyahu was at 4 points instead of 2 points. So he actually gained 2 more seats over the past couple of days. I want to get your thoughts on that. But before we go into that, I do have a very interesting thing that I've noticed because I am in Tel Aviv. Last night, I did a show in next to Pardes Chana in Israel. Pardes Chana, if you're unfamiliar, it's a polygamist religious commune that is next to a kibbutz in the north a little bit. It's like a very hippy-dippy town, basically, right? And it was the first time that I had taken like a taxi or that my friends were driving there. And it's the first time I had taken a ride through the highways of Tel Aviv. And I've noticed that there's 2 kinds of advertisements that are out there. And that is, one, my friend Matan Peretz and Denny Avdia, and then a bunch of celebrities are selling credit cards. So you see their face. That's one sign. And then the next sign is Naftali Bennett hugging random people. And it's just Bennett hugging a lady, Bennett hugging an old woman. So you're driving through the highway and you just see Matan Peretz selling a credit card, Bennett hugging a man, Danny Avdia selling a credit card, Naftali Bennett hugging an old lady, and did not see any Bibi Netanyahu or Gadi Eisenkott signs. And why that is interesting to me is that there was an article that came out that is showing that Gadi Eisenkott is actually buying ad space in Cyprus to advertise to Israelis who are on vacation or potentially want to come back for the election. I was curious if you knew anything about that. This is something I kind of just like saw today. Any thoughts on that?
I've never heard of that. It's a brilliant idea. Is he the first person to do that? Because that's a great choice on his part.
I got no idea. And it kind of plays into the fact that we've talked about like potential pre-election fuckery is what we can call it, that could lead to the election potentially being fuckeried up with. And one of those things is the idea of people coming from out of town into Israel, Israelis who are registered to vote, who are in America or abroad, coming back in just to vote. And there's ideas that like Bibi could potentially like screw up the planes, or he could work with El Al, or, you know, yada, yada, create a war that shuts the airspace. It's like a real, you know, how valid are those concerns?
Very valid. The other concerns are, you know, changing the rules of the game, changing how votes get. I mean, we saw that in the United. We're Americans. Like, we know exactly the type of things that you could see when it comes to elections. And remember, like, Israel doesn't have a real constitution, so it's all up to the Supreme Court. And as we've seen, there is always the potential for a constitutional crisis in which the Supreme Court says, you can't do that. And they say, we don't care. And then who knows what happens next. But that obviously has a massive impact on an election. And there has been, I think, pretty legitimate conversations around the flights coming into Israel. And remember, if there's a war, there's nothing to do, right? It's not technically his fault. Like, I mean, he might just start the war, but if there's a war, people can't fly in to vote, and that's that. And a lot of people are planning to fly in to vote. Or remember, it's a pretty small country. Like, there's a bit of monopoly on who's flying in right now. And so if you know, anything changes in El Al, people won't be. That could be 500,000 voters. I mean, it's a huge difference.
There was another story this week about how Bibi had, and not Bibi, but there was Likud had a vote on how they were going to go forward with primaries even if there wasn't war. And I was wondering, so I had seen people varying degrees of like, wow, this is game changing, to like, it's not that big of a deal. Anything on that at all? Any thoughts?
Likud primary. So Likud and the Democrats are the only two parties that have like a real primary, a real democratic primary. People vote instead of the head of the party choosing the list or some random rabbis choosing the list. They are changing that a little bit in the Likud party. So Netanyahu, it seems like he's going to be selecting like a third of the seats, which is a lot because it ends up being almost half of the seats that actually make it in. And he's going to sort of hand select them. But their committee decided this. And within the Israeli context, for an American, it's a little odd, but from an Israeli context, this is perfectly legit. Like, most other parties are actually one guy's choosing the whole list. So if anything, Likud is still more democratic than in how they're selecting their seats compared to most other parties other than the Democrats. Yeah.
Democrat lefty hero, Bibi Netanyahu and Likud.
That's exactly what I was saying. That was exactly what I was saying.
So this week also, now that we got that out of the way, Gadi Eisenkott up 4 seats in the polling. Do you think it's going to stick? Do you think that this trending is going to hit? And also, is there a chance that he kind of like burns out because it's 3 months, 3 months away? If he keeps on gaining seats, is that a thought process at all?
He could burn out, but I mean, I think there would be a reason for it. He doesn't need to keep gaining seats. He just needs to stay where he is. He doesn't need to gain that many more seats, right? So the question is really, can they be pulled away? But remember that he's running against the prime minister of the country who has enormous power to influence the game, right? We just spoke about, you could start a war. There's endless, you could change the rules of the game. There's endless things you can do. You can normalize with Saudi Arabia. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm saying like you have so much opportunity to change influence how people see you compared to somebody who's just a guy. Not that he's Gadi Eisnkott's just a guy, but like legally he's just a guy. And so he doesn't actually have the type of influence that can affect how this election turns out. Whereas Netanyahu, of course, does, which has really worked in his favor for the past 1,000 years he's been in office. Truthfully, since 2009, other than the small stint with Bennett Lapid, Netanyahu has been the prime minister. 2009, that's a really long time ago. I'm not going to tell you what grade I was in, but it was a long time ago.
What grade was I in? 2009. I guess I was graduating high school like that year.
I think that was like my freshman year of high school, something, yeah.
Oh,
This is the
yes.
polling results. It's an average of 3 different channels for the last few polls. Okay, so it's not just one poll, because I don't believe in just looking at one poll. I will say that I don't include channel 14, because channel 14 is crazy. If you look at the difference in polling from channel 11, 12, and 13 versus 14, they're operating on different planets. Like channel 14
Why?
has Netanyahu's block at 62 seats, okay, because they love Netanyahu, and everyone else has Netanyahu's block at 10 seats lower than that, at least, or 11. Now I'm looking through them, or 12. I see 12 below that. Like nobody is anywhere close to that.
Historically, has that been accurate to like, have they been an accurate polling source, or is this them just like
No, I
shilling
don't
for
think
the guy?
they're just showing up for their dude. I don't think they're more accurate than any of these channels, and it's pretty obvious that they're not right now. But remember, people like to get behind a winner. So if you think your guy's going to win, like, you might be a lot more inclined to show up.
Yeah.
But in terms of the actual normal polling, it's putting what you've coined the the Eisenkott block.
Has that
at
caught on yet on
59.
Twitter?
No.
Dang it.
And it's putting Netanyahu at 51. So 59 to 51, and then you have the 10 seats for the Arab parties. And some of those are part of Mansour Abbas's Ram party, which theoretically would go to Gadi Eisenkott, or could go to Gadi Eisenkott. He has not said that, but it's I think pretty clear that that's a likely scenario, which is looking pretty good for him. That said, you still do need to would need to convince every member of the Zionist opposition to bring in Mansour Abbas, which is, I think, a likely scenario, but not 100% certain. And Gadi Eisenkott and Netanyahu, in terms of getting the plurality of seats, are really neck and neck. So yes, in different polling, you see Gadi Eisenkott ahead, but often it's really only by 1 or 2 seats. They're struggling for that top seat. And I'll tell you what that means, because, by the way, that doesn't mean you're the prime minister. I think I made that clear in the last podcast, but I'm going to make it really clear on this one. That does not make you the prime minister. Getting a plurality of seats, by the way, if you didn't listen to the last episode, I'm not repeating things for you, so go listen. No. No repeats here, okay?
You're an indoctrinated Israeli by the time you get to episode 2 of this, okay? You're basically, you're using kapara around town. You're wearing sandals.
Kapara.
Capara. Listen, I could not be more American than I am. Mutarli la lechet la sherutim.
Eitan, why don't you tell us, how do you think the prime minister gets chosen?
How do I think? Okay, first of all, what people have to understand is that the prime minister is actually chosen in Cleveland, Ohio during the DNC. Okay, that's what it happens 4 years ago. Okay, sorry, you answer.
Okay, we're starting back with, I don't remember exactly where we left off, so I might have lied and repeated a little bit, but
yes. Wait, before we start off, then I have one question that I want to ask, because we are doing weekly listener mailbag sections, and I did have, I do have an actual question. There was a question that I got from multiple different people, and that is that. Okay. So this is listener mailbag, which we have to name something. The Mazel Tov mailbag. Actually, we're not naming it that. So this week, we're not naming it the Mazel bag, okay? So nobody asked for this. Okay, fresh out of the Mazel bag. This week and over the last week, we've seen a lot of Gadi Eisenkott making his way into American media. Now, an interesting thing that has popped up around Gadi Eisenkott is that people are saying, as much as he's like the anti-Bibi or the Bibi killer, people have asked, how is he actually different than Bibi when it comes to ending anything past like ending wars and stuff like that? So the question I have is, structurally, what are the other things that Gadi is different than Bibi, or are we just getting Bibi, but he's not Bibi again?
A lot of things are different, but remember, the key difference is not about the individual, it's who their coalition partners are. So even if, as human beings, they supported similar policies, one of them is running basically with the ultra-Orthodox and religious nationalists, and those are his coalition partners, and one of them is not running with, I shouldn't say running with, but part of an opposition bloc that includes left-wing parties and Arab parties. So it's a totally different makeup of a coalition. It's less a question to me of the individual and more a question of the whole makeup of the bloc, which really influences them. Because I could say Netanyahu is an individual. I don't think he supports a Haredi draft exemption, but that's what he's been advancing for the past 10 years, right? Gadi Eisenkott is clearly looking to avoid enforce a draft, right? So they're really different on core policy issues. I would say they're different on a lot of policy issues that are coming up in this election. Commission of inquiry for October 7th. Obviously, Benjamin Netanyahu does not want, because it will make him look terrible, most likely scenario. And Gadi Eisenkott, that's his main thing. But a lot of these issues have to do with ultra Orthodox and Arab communities, which as individuals, it's possible Netanyahu agrees with Gadi on a lot of these things, but he can't say that because he's bound by his partners on the right and in the religious communities. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What about West Bank policy?
Would be different, because Netanyahu is, of course, Netanyahu is again bound by his really far right coalition partners, Bezalel Smotrich in particular, who has taken a really leading role in the West Bank, which has allowed, enabled, encouraged many illegal outposts that are illegal under Israeli law throughout the West Bank. We're even seeing them in Area B, which is a portion of the West Bank that you really never see Jewish settlements in, and now we are. And of course, you see settler violence that's quite rampant right now. And again, that's not just enabled by the rhetoric. It's that the people, the institutions, even within the military that are responsible for this, are often falling under Bezalel Smotrich's guidance. And so again, it's not Bibi, but Bibi is now giving this a really important post to Bezalel Smotrich. And that's the guy who's the problem, right? So without eliminating him, you can't eliminate this problem. And he is a core part of Netanyahu's coalition. And therefore, if Gadi Eisenkott's in power, you will see a crackdown on a lot of these things. Certainly, I would say illegal outposts, and definitely settler violence. Broader conversations about the future of the West Bank, I think, are being put on the back burner and will be if there is what is now the opposition comes to power. I think it will take them a long time to reach that point, but that's for another time. We're going to do a whole episode on the West Bank, so you can hear me yap about it.
And last question on this. Difference between Gadi and Bibi when it comes to Iran, Lebanon, and I mean, Gaza, it seems to be, I don't know if there's really anything that can change there, but like Lebanon and Iran, is there a difference between Gadi and Bibi?
Nothing substantial enough for me to say. I think that they probably would each say, Gadi would probably say that they're very different, but I think the reality of it is that they would be quite similar, quite hawkish on Iran, Lebanon, and Syria. That said, there have been a few moments over the past few years where I think Netanyahu has made choices, especially in Lebanon and Syria, that Gadi might have done differently, but I don't have anything like official to report on it.
Awesome. Okay, Shanie, let me just say, that was probably my favorite mazel bag that we've ever done. Okay, you hate this.
I actually love it. I swear I love it.
No, we have to. I don't like it. I'm projecting my own hatred of the word mazel bag. It feels dirty in a way I don't like. We will. You know what? If anyone out there has a better name than mazel bag, please send it our way. You can DM me or Shanie or you know what? Israel Policy Forum. Email them directly. Anyways, Shanie, episode 2 of 120 Angry Seats. Last week, we talked about the Knesset and the formation of the Knesset with the election. Today, I want to talk about the formation of the political parties. What do you got?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we're going to fast forward to election night. We already spoke about how parties run together and they run apart because they need to get into the Knesset. We spoke about wasted votes and how if you don't hit a certain threshold, 3.25% of the total vote, you don't get in. And that could be anywhere between 100 and 200,000 votes, but it's maybe like over 150 a little bit. And you also have vote sharing agreements. So the Likud party and Bezalel Smotrich's party could come together and say, if we get extra votes, then at the end, if we make it in the Knesset, we can add those votes together for one seat if they equal one seat, right? So there's like really weird, sketchy things that happen. It's not sketchy, it's legal, but it's a very bizarre system to me. Anyhow, there's vote sharing agreements, there's mergers, all that happens. End of the day, election night happens. Nobody has yet won, okay? I don't think, sometimes there's an obvious winner, but the last 5 elections, or 4 out of 5 of the last elections, there was not an obvious winner, so I wouldn't assume that by any means. But there is going to be a guy who has more seats, and it will be a guy. Not more votes necessarily. Like, it's not about how many votes they have, it's about how many seats they have. It could easily be a tie. Like, it's very easy to imagine a scenario where Gadi and Likud both have 22 seats, or one could have a little more, one could have a little less. But again, it's a math problem. It's not about who actually got the most seats. for the 1 week after the elections. It is the president, Bougie Herzog's time to shine. Okay, this is his moment.
Can we go back on that point? This is an interesting
Yeah.
difference between the American election and the Israeli election, where because it doesn't really matter, the popular vote does not matter in America, and you can really concede an election like fairly quickly, you know, if you just realize that you're losing. Versus here, because the seats have to be delegated out, you have to count every vote to understand how many seats everyone has. So it's like less. It's interesting because in America, the last like 3 elections, because these have been Trump elections, you've had the stop the vote, don't stop the vote, challenges, court cases, and everything that would end the voting system, or it was an anomaly if we got to an end where we would count every vote. We didn't know that Kamala had lost the popular vote until weeks later, and it didn't make a difference because she conceded, you know, on the first night when she went 0 for 7 on swing states and is still considering a run. Huh. Crazy things in America. So that's an interesting part. Big difference between the American system and the Israeli system is that you got to count all the votes to know how the seats lie out.
Right. It's also an infinitely smaller country. I don't know by how many magnitudes, but it's infinitely smaller than the United States, right? The U.S. is like maybe 100 times larger in population. I mean, it's massive compared to Israel. So that's also why every vote really matters. So they count up the votes from the military and the military ballots, and they count up the votes from the prisons a little bit later. And so everyone's always waiting on those votes because they do make a difference. They could push it right or left, depending on the year, and depending on what's going on, if there's a war or not, things like that.
How do the prisoners tend to vote? They go right or left?
I have no idea. Historically, the IDF goes left, but I don't know if that's the case anymore.
No, but the prisoners, that you don't know.
I'll look into that.
Huh.
I'll look into that.
That's interesting. Yeah. Kind of curious about that. Yeah. Yeah. What if they're
we'll
big?
See, you know the heat map we spoke about. Maybe the heat map covers the prisons as well.
Yeah.
So. The president, his time to shine, he meets with the head of every single party. He has a conversation with them in his office, and he tries to assess who they are going to recommend. So it's not just the heads of the 2 major parties, it's everybody else. Because remember, you need to add up to 61, and whoever wins is going to have somewhere between 20 and 30 seats probably, right? They're not going to have, they're definitely not getting anywhere near 61 on their own, so they need to merge. So he has to meet with all of the heads of the smaller parties and say, who are you going to go with? And then he needs to do the math himself and try to figure out who's going to have the best shot at actually building a coalition, which means getting those 61 seats, 61 human beings to all agree, and probably maybe 4 to 7 parties to all agree, okay? Usually he picks the person with the biggest party, but it's really not always. And then he hands, my seat just fell. And then he hands over to, let's pretend it's Benjamin Netanyahu, because in the last election it was, hands over the mandate, they call it, and he now has 28 days, but really 6 weeks, because you get an extension for 2 weeks, to talk to every person who's been like yelling at him for the past really years, but certainly election cycle. A bunch of people who want to set each other on fire get together and they yell and they negotiate and they figure out if they can pull it together. If they fail, it passes to a second candidate. If he fails, in theory, you could send it to another candidate, but I don't know if that's even ever happened. And if everybody strikes out, they're back to elections again. I'm going to remind you that this actually did happen, and I'll tell you all about it later on in the episode. But for now, just understand this is what happens. During those 28 days, during those, we'll call it 6 weeks, okay, you have who will probably be Eisenkott or Netanyahu, meeting with everybody and trying to get them to agree with him and to say, we're going to vote with you, okay? It's not always about, I think negotiate's like a nice word. It's bribery. It's just like full bribery, okay? It's not even about ideology. It's about, are you going to give me a ministry? Are you going to promise to do what I want? Sometimes it's policy. It's also like money for specific issue areas, right? Mansour Abbas from the Arab sector, he may say, I want a big budget for education of Arab Israeli children. And that might be one of his, I am not saying that's what he said, but like that could be the sort of thing, right? We saw for this current government, Netanyahu had promised during these negotiations a draft exemption from the ultra-Orthodox, which he wasn't able to deliver on. But the point is, this was one of the reason he said that is because he needed them to come and work together with him. So they're sort of haggling over all of these things, who gets what cabinet post, how much budget is going to which sector, things like that. This is why, and by the way, at the end, you have this written signed coalition agreement, okay? But this is how you ended up with a country that has like 30 ministers, okay? For no reason. America, I checked, they have like 15 of the equivalent. And again, this country is infinitely larger. Israel has a ministry of sports and culture. They have a ministry of heritage. They have a ministry of religious services, okay? They have both a minister of defense and a minister of national security. I mean, it's like ridiculous. And every time you hand out a ministry, it means you get a staff of advisors, you get a fancy office, you get a driver, you get a security guard. Okay. So it's a lot of money being wasted so that somebody can feel good about themselves and have theoretical power. Sometimes, by the way, they have real power. And in this case of someone like Bezalel Smotrich, you create a position and then he takes power away from the IDF or another institution that's really not meant to be politicized. So
can I just
all
say,
these
by
things
the way,
have happened. Please.
This is so comically similar to how most synagogues run their boards, is what I will say. This is a lot of annoying coalition building, and then someone's made the VP of Kiddush, and then there's a minister of Kiddush Club, and they're not in the same capacity. Someone's in charge of the Purim baskets, and someone's in charge of the cookies that go into the Purim baskets and stuff. Is this the most complicated version of assembling a government that you could possibly have? Is there a government that has a more complicated version of this?
I wish I knew other governments well enough to say that, but I will say that in the UK, they have had like a dozen prime ministers since I can recall. So I think there's like something weird going on there too. I imagine that I'm just not as familiar, but compared to America, I think this is overly complicated for sure.
Yeah, America.
And it takes way too long. This takes way too long. Too long and too short, right? Like it's kind of both of those things at the same time. But like it takes too long to figure out who is actually the prime minister of the country, unless it's Donald Trump, and then there's like a whole fight about certifying elections and all that stuff. But in general, it takes much longer.
There's that old joke about the Christian who converted to Judaism and was asked about the restaurant that he just ate. And he was optimistic and he said, yeah, well, the portions were tiny, but at least it was expensive. That's the the version of this. Okay. So the president, who, by the way, you pointed out something last episode that I did like a lot about how the president does really it's a show job until this one thing. And then his big role, his big time to shine is putting these governments together and making sure that they stick.
Yeah. It reminds me of the vice president certifying elections, but a little more powerful. It's like the first lady plus the vice president equals the president of Israel. That's how I think of it. I made that up just now.
Last time this happened, was there a mob of people that tried to hang Herzog outside of it like they did with Mike Pence? Or is that not part of a...
No, that's never happened. It might be worse in America. I take back what I said. So under this system, basically the smaller parties have a lot more power than you would expect because of how this system is built, right? As a really small party who has 4, 5, 6 seats can still be the kingmaker if they are the most annoying. It is all about how stubborn you are. If you make it obvious that you are actually not willing to sit in that government, they just need to bribe you and bribe you and bribe you and give you everything you want until you agree. So the more stubborn you are, the better it is in this case. So it's not like, oh, the second largest party has the most power. No, it's often the smaller parties because they are more extreme and they are more ideological and more annoying. Right. And so if they threaten to walk, you need to give them whatever you want because you don't want to go to another election or you don't want to let the other guy try to go to the elections. OK, so I think the other piece I should add is that if you end up going back to elections again and again and again, the ruling party stays in power. So you could keep a government that does not really technically have a mandate for power for a very long time. You can have at least another year, if not more, where you're just running the country. And we saw that in Israel, where Netanyahu, like there were 3 elections, he just sat there as they went on and he remained in power, which is a little bit bizarre. Any questions on that before I move to how governments fall? And then I'll tell you what happened in 2019.
I'll save any questions on that for the mazel bag. Okay.
Okay, great. So you can, now that you know how they're created, it's obvious to see how they fall, I think, which is that you need to get 61 people who half of them hate each other to sit together and vote together. Any point in the 4 years where that drops below 61, which it easily could, you're basically ending up without a government and you're going to elections. So you convince...
Is that an official process? Like, is that like like I am submitting paperwork that's saying like I am no longer part of the coalition? Or is that just like an informal, like I'm not with you anymore?
I think there has to be paperwork involved, but I'm remembering during the Bennett-Lapid government that Idit Silman, like Naftali Bennett found out in the news. They allegedly, like he just opened up the newspaper and it was like, oh, she's left us and now we have an election. Okay. Well, it wasn't exactly that quick, but the point being, like, I assume there's a formal process, but I have never heard of one. All I've heard is people announcing it and then like all of a sudden they're gone. And then of course you do need to actually like vote out. So the other way is if you don't pass a budget by a certain date, you're supposed to automatically go to elections, right? Which is, I think, a lot better than our system, which is in America, the government just doesn't function if there's no budget, and then you just don't get things. I think forcing an election is actually like a nice response to that because it kind of threatens the government that like you're not allowed to hold the American people hostage. You can't do that in Israel, which I think is a good thing. Although I don't know if we could handle that many election cycles.
Oh, you don't like it? You don't like it? Good. We got no budget, so we're not going to have any school this month.
There's no mail. Like, what? It's just it's a crazy system. So, and it's a really big country to have a situation like that. Other option is a no confidence vote. So you could get 61 members of Knesset to agree on replacing the prime minister, technically, which is pretty insane. I don't think that's ever happened. Or the Knesset can just like vote to dissolve itself, which I don't like that because in theory, you could have someone like Netanyahu say, and this kind of has happened, I think it's better for me to go to elections now than to wait until the 4 years are up or wait until some other time. I'm going to choose, like, I'm going to decide that we're going to go to elections and basically get the Knesset votes to dissolve and go to elections. And I don't think that's so democratic because you can choose what's a good time for you to go to go to elections, right? And in Israel, it is really affected by what's going on in the discourse and in frankly, the geopolitical elements. So let's say there was a huge win for Netanyahu. He gets Saudi normalization. He says, this is a good time to go to elections. I don't want to wait until the next war. I just got Saudi normalized with me. Now I'm going to go, right? Like that sort of thing is acceptable here.
When you dissolve the government, does that, so like, let's say I got an election happening in 2030, right? And it's 2028 now. And I decide I'm going to dissolve the government. Does that, and I could just have an election now. So I'm going to have a 2028
You're the
election.
prime minister in this scenario? Just
let's say Prime Minister Eitan and his brutal regime has taken over and it's been, I would consider myself an immediate dictator. I came in there thinking that I would run this democratically, and then I saw how much money to be made, and I thought, you know what? I want to do this forever. So 2028, I decide I want to have this election now. If I have that election now, you don't do the 2031, or you do this in addition to the 2031?
Correct. You don't do. No. You restart the cycle.
So then my question is
2031.
So then it pushes it to 2032. Basically,
it's 4 years. Technically, you have a government for 4 years from whenever you start, and it doesn't matter when you start, or until 4 years, or until whatever happens.
So 2028,
like, somebody drops
the Eitan Levine regime. The Levine regime decides I'm not going to win in 2030, so I'm going to do this now, and then I don't have to deal with this until 2032.
Right. My point being, I think what you're trying to get that in the American perspective, like we think of like. That we know what year is an election year. In Israel, you don't have that concept.
Yes.
Like you kind of know, but like you don't really. So it's not like, oh, we know that every 4 years on the dot, regardless of what happens in between, there's an election. They don't have that concept, right? Yes. Do you remember what happened in 2019?
Yes. Bennett gets elected Bennett gets elected as prime minister, and then legendarily brings in the Arab blocs and is not able to. And then his government dissolves because of infighting.
Talking. That was 2021. No. Stop talking. I'm going to start.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
You could have just said no. No,
you're
not wrong. You're not that wrong. You're only a little wrong. I'm going to get there, but by the way, listeners, if you do not care, like totally fair. But I think a lot of people started paying attention to Israeli elections a lot more recently. And in 2019, there was like a crazy situation, and it's not out of the question that could happen again. So I'm going to tell you what happened. It'll also help you understand who all these players are. Some of them are totally irrelevant now, which I also think is really fun. But remember, there's a kingmaker, okay? The kingmaker, when people call someone kingmaker, it means they're the most stubborn person who's potentially in the coalition, okay? They're the person who's threatening to leave at all times and who you have to make them happy. That's basically what it means, okay? Netanyahu had a government in 2015, okay? Now, It dissolves somewhere around 2018, a little bit earlier than it's supposed to. Why? Because the defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, you may have seen him, he's a very grouchy Soviet man. His party, Israel Beitenu, which is very hawkish, very Russian, they decided to leave because Bibi agreed to a ceasefire with Hamas after a flare-up, and he was very upset. He said, that's not right. He really wanted to crush Hamas, and the coalition ended up very precarious, and Netanyahu ends up calling for early elections, again, because he sees that he's going to clearly lose his majority, okay? April 2019, that's the election. That's when we start this cycle. Benny Gantz, who is now polling below the threshold, not even making into the Knesset. Back in 2019, he was the star. He was the Gadi Eisnkott of 2019. He starts his blue and white party, which starts basically head-to-head with Netanyahu. Again, almost identical to what happened. He was also former IDF chief of staff, right? Very, very similar scenario. I have a lot more hope in Gadi Eisenkott, but you can't trust me because I had hope in Benny Gantz too. Gantz is clearly unable to form a coalition, even though they're sort of head-to-head. Gantz fails. Netanyahu fails because Netanyahu cannot convince Avigdor Lieberman to sit with the ultra-Orthodox, and they hate each other, okay? Lieberman is there's a lot of contention with former Soviet and Russian-speaking Jews in Israel who are many of them are pretty secular. Some are patrilineal Jews, and you can imagine that puts them at odds with the ultra-Orthodox. So it's very, very different communities. And so he feels very strongly about them serving in the military too. So they won't sit together, okay? And he's kind of the clincher because Netanyahu's coalition doesn't exist without both the ultra-Orthodox and Avigdor Lieberman at the time, okay? By the way, it's not crazy that he would be the kingmaker again, I think, in this cycle, but not with Benny Gantz, of course, all right? And so basically, this is the first time this happens in Israel's history that nobody's able to form a government. They go back to elections. So you have election number 2, September 2019, a few months later, okay? Netanyahu tries, again, can't get his guys to work together. Bennett's involved too somewhere. Gantz tries, Gantz fails. Election number 3, which is like, at this point, everyone's like, this is the craziest thing that's ever happened, okay? Netanyahu, by the way, is still in power this whole time. Now you get to March 2020. By the way, other things happening in March 2020, COVID starting, whatever, but you still squeeze in an election, all right? Likud's getting ahead of Gantz, but Lieberman is fed up with Bibi, decides he's going to back Benny Gantz, which actually gives him a shot at the mandate. In all this process, Benny Gantz, he's running as the anti-Netanyahu. So he's saying, I'm not going to sit with Netanyahu. By the way, at this point, people are really talking about the corruption trials and all the bribery trials, okay? The investigations of Netanyahu, people actually cared about that back then. Now, like, everyone's forgotten, kind of. But at the time, this was really top of mind for people. So Benny Gantz says, I'm not going to sit with Netanyahu, okay? He promises. Meanwhile, nobody's able to form a government. Gantz and Netanyahu end up in conversation. Remember, it's COVID, so the excuse is kind of like it was a emergency, not an emergency, but like things were going a little bit crazy. We don't want to go to another election during COVID. This is kind of insane. Gantz ends up negotiating a deal with Netanyahu where it's a rotating prime minister deal. This should not be allowed, but it is allowed, where two guys come together and they don't even have to have the most votes necessarily. Like, you could do this with Itamar Ben-Gvir if you wanted to. And you say, I'm going to be prime minister for a year and a half. You're going to be the prime minister for a year and a half. Again, totally nutty thing to do, but they do. And
I love that, though. That's beautiful.
It's unhinged. It's the craziest thing of all of this. It's the craziest piece. Now, what happens after 18 months of Netanyahu being the prime minister? He orchestrates that the budget doesn't pass, basically screws over Benny Gantz and makes sure they go to elections before he can become the prime minister. Okay, so if people talk about Benny Gantz in a negative light, it's often dating back to this, where he went back on his campaign promise not to sit with Netanyahu, and he got totally screwed by him. Okay, because
was this also, was this that run where they didn't pass a budget like over and over and over and over and over, or I think about a different run?
I don't know, but yeah, I think so, because they were preventing the budget from passing. The Likud party made sure the budget didn't pass, basically, knowing it would force an election. And they Netanyahu pretended. He was like, I don't want to go to elections, but of course it was very obvious he did, and it made Benny look like what we would call like a friar. Like, it made him look like he was being taken advantage of, which he was. He was kind of a sucker. Like, he got totally played by Netanyahu in that situation. So now we're going back to elections. Okay, it's election number 4 in a 2-year period, right? Which is nuts. March 2021, Bibi comes out ahead, but he is not able to actually build a coalition. He starts to talk to Mansour Abbas from the Brahm Party. This is the first time in Israeli history that there's real, like, there's serious conversations about an Arab party joining. There's actually potential for that happening. And again, I think it's important to say, because there's so much delegitimization of partnering with the Arab parties, any of them, including Mansour Abbas from the Ram party, who's very moderate on certain issues and actually very conservative on different issues. Netanyahu is the one who legitimized that. He is the first one to meet with them. So remember that when all of these AI videos are coming up where Netanyahu is saying, I would never sit with these people, and you're so terrible and anti-Zionist for thinking about sitting with Mansour Abbas, remember that he is the reason this became part of the discourse. He is the reason this became okay. He legitimized it by having meetings with Mansour Abbas, and there's a lot of evidence that this happened, and Mansour Abbas spoke out about it. And so as a result, it opens the door to everybody else, right? If Netanyahu can do it, why can't Benny Gantz? Why can't Yair Lapid? Why can't Naftali Bennett start talking to Mansour Abbas? And so they do. And Yair Lapid gets the Meretz and Labor left-wing parties. He gets Benny Gantz. He gets Naftali Bennett's Yamina party, which is right-wing. And he gets Ram, Mansour Abbas's party, to join together. This is the first time in history you have an Arab party joining the coalition. And they did another one of these insane rotating prime minister deals, okay, in which you have Naftali Bennett and you have Yair Lapid, and each of them gets their rotation turn as the prime minister, okay? But there was enormous pressure on the people, on the members of Knesset in Naftali Bennett's party. Enormous pressure. A lot of them came from the Likud. They are all right-wing religious communities, and these people were being harassed. Their kids were being threatened in school. Their spouses being harassed in their workplaces. Like, it was really horrible. So Idit Silman, one of the lawmakers, ends up dropping. She was the defector, the main defector that people think about here, and she claimed it was about some law they were passing to allow bread into hospitals during Passover. But I think that was clearly all it, guys. Yeah. And
this country's
and then you
amazing.
Yeah,
that's the funniest thing. It is one big synagogue meeting.
The truth is, it's one big synagogue meeting. She defects. That's what you call it when you drop out. One other guy, Nir Orbach, resigns, and then they dissolve the Knesset. They go to another election, 2022. That's the election where we get this current government, Israel's most right-wing and religious government in its history. And here we are today.
Is there any worry in your head, or talk to me about the worries about not repeating that, about, you said that one of the reasons why, you're generally not trustworthy, not trusting, or you're not like throwing your entire belief behind the fact that Gadi is like leading and everything, is because you've seen this play out in some capacity before. Do you see that kind of like coming here? Like, what are the forces that you see are more likely to do some Israeli election fuckery, which I'll keep on using until I find out a better word for it?
I think this is a complete possibility. First of all, it already happened. The political map looks different, but it doesn't look different enough. You still, even when you see the Eisenblock, as we've been calling it, it's still below 61 without the Arab parties. That means you need to bring in the Ram party, specifically the Ram party, which means you have to get everyone else to agree. Counted in the Eisenkott block is Yisrael Beitenu, Avigdor Lieberman, a very hawkish guy who is pretty resistant to sitting in a government with Mansour Abbas and Arab parties. Never mind that basically everyone else also in the opposition also said we're not going to sit with Arab parties. Again, I've told you, I don't think that that's really the case for all of them. I think most of them are going to change their tune when it comes time, but I don't necessarily know that Avigdor Lieberman will be among them. And if they don't all agree to include the Arab parties, then technically they're still below. Again, things could change. They could go up in seats. We have several months to go. But if they don't, or if they go lower, they're going to need Arab parties. And I don't see any guarantee. And Netanyahu definitely doesn't, because he's made it pretty clear he's not sitting with Arab parties, and he's very clearly below the requirements, the minimum requirements. Okay.
What's that negotiation like between like Lieberman or whoever doesn't want to work with the Arabs and the Arabs? Like, if you're Gadi, or if you're Gadi's political strategist, what are you telling them to get them both like on board?
To get the Arabs on board?
Or to get like the anti-Arab bloc that you would need?
So I think the polling shows that most opposition voters are generally okay with it, or they prefer it to the alternatives, right? I just saw 44% of opposition voters support going with the Arabs, but then they're split amongst the other things. So you have like 20% say go back to elections, 20% say stay with the opposition, it's have a unity government, right? Which is also an option. So I think that the polling shows that it's the right decision. I also think that Mansour Abbas has come out pretty Zionist, has said he understands it's a Jewish state, he supports a Jewish state, right? He's sort of a special interest group just looking out for his own community, cares about crime, education, funding, things like that. So I think it's a pretty good sell. Like, I think that Mansour Abbas is a totally acceptable person to have in the government. And I think that if you can paint him in that light, they haven't invested enough in doing that because the head of elections, I imagine that during the negotiation periods, during the coalition agreements and reconfigurations, they'll start to do some of that work of explaining that Mansour Abbas is not this boogeyman, right? And he really is not. The other things that could change are there are small parties that could make it in or out, right? There's a small party of a reservist party, which is more to the right, and they could get involved. They could end up increasing or joining with somebody else for vote sharing, and that could push up the current Netanyahu bloc a little bit. You could see the same on the left. There's a new Jewish Arab party, which could also sort of push up the votes if they make it in the threshold. So those are the sorts of things that would really change much more than anything else happening between the current parties are these like new smaller parties, which you could see sort of merging with someone else, with another party and sort of picking up some votes, especially if they bring in people who don't vote. So the Jewish Arab party, Arab voter turnout in Israel is not as high as it could be. This group is claiming that they are bringing in people who've never voted before. So that's the sort of thing that could really shift the blocks.
Awesome. This is interesting. I guess like what I wanted to get away from this episode is that, this upcoming election, seeing how previous elections and seeing how everything has kind of like happened and then like how it's dissolved and everything is something to look out for specifically for the next election. And this, like, I think did a pretty good job at explaining that.
Yeah.
Not to
I think it's the reason
hard.
I explained 2019 is really because we could see this again, so people should look out for it. And the way to avoid it is to already start normalizing the relationship with the Arab party, specifically with Mansour Abbas. If they are normalizing to the public the idea of cooperating with him, that's sort of the best way to avoid this, in my view.
The big difference between the Israeli parties and the American parties is that the American parties have been around forever. And they're the same two parties, third party, depending on the election, versus Israeli side where it is a couple of staples, and then even the staples don't stay along for eternity. There's a very good chance that, we could be looking at in an election too where Likud is struggling for 8 seats, and just like the
Labor Party ran the country for decades. Okay, the idea that the Labor Party would be so small that it has to merge with another party was unthinkable before. So things can change, and the belief that things can change for better or for worse is important to stay in the game. So,
do you need to be from Israel to be the prime minister, or can you be from America and be the prime minister?
I don't think you have to be born in Israel.
I'm telling you right now.
You have
Prime
to.
Minister Zoran Mamdani,
get
you comfortable with it.
I'll see you next time, Eitan.
That's right. Shanie, thank you so much for coming in. This has been another episode of 120 Angry Chairs. They'll lead up to...
We said seats.
Seats. I keep on screwing this up. I will never get anything... I'll never pronounce things correctly the first time, and I will definitely keep on screwing up this name until the end of our last episode on this on October 28th or whenever we wrap this up. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure to tune in next week. Listen to the old episodes. Subscribe to this. If you have any questions or anything about the election in general, send it out. Yes, Shanie.
And go to israelpolicyforum.org/120, spelled out in letters, not numbers.
The incredible resources, I would say up-to-date resources and stuff. Really great visuals. I don't know who your designer is, but incredible stuff. Once again, Prime Minister Zoran Mamdani would be proud when it comes to the graphics and everything.
All right.
Next week,
God forbid.
Prime Minister Mamdani on the muzzle bag. Anyways, we will see you guys next week. And then now, Barstool.